Don't tell me that the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. Hello and welcome to Shining Moon, episode 26, Flash Fiction, When the Fic is Quick, 2. I'm your host, Deborah L. Davitt. With me today are Amanda Helms, Vylar Kaftan, and Aimee Picchi as we discuss the art of writing flash fiction, stories that are around or under 1,000 words in length. Let's get started with some introductions. Amanda Helms, she, her, is a biracial black-white fantasy, science fiction, and sometimes horror writer whose stories have appeared in Faya, Lightspeed, Nature Futures, and other fine venues. She lives with her family in Colorado. Though all of them are natives, none ski or snowboard, proving that such creatures do indeed exist. Find her at amandahelms.com, on Instagram at amandaghelms, or Blue Sky at amandaghelms.bluesky.social. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I unfortunately don't have anything scintillating to say, so I'll just let it go.
Okay. I don't demand something scintillating,
Okay.
but if you just want to say hello back, that works perfectly fine.
All right.
Vylar Kaftan has published over 50 short stories in magazines such as Asimov's, Lightspeed, and Clarkesworld. I'm so envious of the Clarkesworld credit. Her alternate history novella, The Weight of the Sunrise, won the Nebula and Sidewise awards. Her queer psychic thriller, Her Silhouette Drawn in Water, which is a killer title, is available through Tor.com. Hi, Vylar. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Still sick, but we'll not touch on that right now.
Sorry to hear that.
It's a thing. So, Aimee Picchi is a journalist by day and a Nebula nominated science fiction and fantasy writer by night. Her short fiction has been published in Nightmare Magazine, The Deadlands, Apex, and Podcastle, among other fine publications. She's a former classical musician on the viola who graduated from the University of Rochester's Eastman School of Music. She lives in Burlington, Vermont with her family. You can find her online at aimeepicchi.com or on Twitter at Aimee Picchi. Hi, Aimee. How are you today?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me. And I'm really happy to be here talking about flash fiction because it is one of my loves. So really happy to be here to delve into this with all of you guys.
Yeah. Like we touched on in the last episode, Codex, which is a organization for neo-pro and pro writers, has every year for many years now had a competition / writing workshop called Weekend Warrior, which is dedicated to Flash. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Vylar is the inception point for Weekend Warrior. She is the person who gave us all the prompts for many years and has gracefully and gratefully retired from running it, but it has passed it on to other people who are continuing the fine tradition at this point in time. So thank you, Vylar, for many years of prompts and a lot of the love that you have given to the community by doing this.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be able to give back to the community because that is one of my favorite things to do. 15 years, by the way.
So 15 years is a long time to do something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Writing all the prompts, managing it, and sure got better when I deputized some people to help. That really was some
It does take a moment to realize that you probably should do that. I personally run Victory in Verse on Codex, which is a much smaller contest. And people have been volunteering to be deputies. And I'm like, you don't understand. It's so small that I can really do this on my own.
It's so tiny. Originally was small enough that I could do it on my own. But yes.
Yeah, it has grown. There are literally hundreds of authors trying to be coordinated at this point in time because they're doing it right now. This is the season of Weekend Warrior right now as we speak. So
about 120 people a year. Sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah, that's a lot of writers. That's a lot of stories, and it's a lot to deal with. So, but if anybody is out there and listening who isn't on Codex, all you have to do to join is have one pro writing credit or have done a workshop like Clarion or something like that, just go ahead, sign up. It's a wonderful experience in a very outgoing and warm community. So I love it. So let's go ahead and dive into our questions. My first question for you is, how do you know or decide that you've really got Flash on your hands as opposed to a story that ought to be revised to be longer? Which is a corollary question is, do you start out deliberately trying to commit Flash, or do you generally just write the story that you have in your head and then say, oh, well, this is actually Flash length? And I'm going to start with Amanda. Do you deliberately go out to commit Flash, or is this something that just sort of happens along the way? How does this work for you?
As we were talking a little bit before we started recording, I started out as a novelist, and so I had to learn how to write short. And so I am now at the point where if I want to write a Flash piece, I recognize more easily if my idea is in fact Flash sized. And so that is what I try to do now if I really saying, okay, it's time for me to write a Flash, because it is very difficult for me to edit down. I am not at all an underwriter. I kind of wish I were, because I feel like it might save me some time, but I am not. And so if I truly can't recognize when I start that an idea is Flash size or not Flash size, I recognize that it is not Flash because I keep going and going and going. And so, yes, and I can cut some of it down, but usually not to the point where it's a cohesive, satisfying Flash piece if it's really not going to fit. So
I, like you, am set to maximum verbosity by default. So
yeah, I actually, in college, in one of my college writing classes, one of our assignments was to write a little 100-word snippet, and I had to edit mine down, and our professor wanted to see the before and after versions, and he was like, your before version was actually better. Have a more verbose style. But in any case, some clues that I have now figured out to tell me when an idea is Flash sized or not. If there's a lot of backstory required to understand the character motivations because the character is acting in an unusual way, probably not Flash. If you need a lot of description to understand the world building, also not Flash. And me being a epic fantasy writer to begin with, that was probably leading to a lot of issues I had early on. Your planned character arc is too big to accomplish in a Flash piece. Like a whole ideology change is going to be really, really hard to pull off in Flash because you can't fit in all the events that would need to occur to justify, all the story beats. For me personally, if I start getting to 3 or 4 characters, that's a warning sign that maybe my story is getting beyond Flash size. I can do 3 or 4 characters, but that's going to be a longer piece of Flash and is probably at the point where I might be able to develop it more as well. Same for settings. And I would also say, don't underestimate the power of a non-traditional format if you're writing Flash. There's a reason why a lot of Flash might be, list format or journal entry, or I had one a while back that was presented as an essay written by a high school student. So, and I actually really enjoy those as well, but I'm getting a little off topic, so I'll stop there.
Okay, I think that's a very comprehensive answer of what's not Flash. Aimee, how about you? How do you start with Flash? Do you decide to commit Flash up front, or do you have any way to recognize that your idea is Flash shaped or not?
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually most of my stories do start as Flash. You mentioned in the intro that I'm a journalist, and I think maybe it comes out of being a journalist that usually my articles aren't more than 1,000 words. So I think I naturally write into a Flash size length. Like it's just kind of the way I think about stories. And I have to say that the competitions at Codex, Weekend Warrior and Flash Savior of the Universe, I love doing them. So I often am just writing every week. And I get a lot of stories out that way. So I just love Flash. I think in Flash length, I think. But that being said, I have done a lot of stories, Flash stories. I started, 1,000 words or less. And then I realize, oh, this really does need to be longer. And sometimes you get those comments, we were talking about this earlier, like, this is intriguing, but it really needs to be longer. That's like a very typical comment you might get in Warrior from the other readers in your group. And I think sometimes kind of what Amanda was saying, like you realize, okay, the world building, it's too complicated. I need more space for this. The character, this is a character piece. It really needs more space and more breathing time. Sometimes it's just like a line in a story, a flash story that and when you reread the story, you realize, oh, this is a scene. Like this one line actually needs to be its own scene. And I need to this out and go with those, explore that scene and the implications of it. Sometimes the characters just have more to say. But, one thing I really love about Flash is that it gives you that idea, that nugget that you can expand into a longer story. And I've had, I'm not sure how many stories of mine ended up as like 4,000 or 5,000 word stories from Flash, but I have several that started out that way. So I think Flash is great when it works as Flash, but it's also great just to write Flash and realize, okay, I can make this into something bigger. I definitely have never had a Flash piece become a novel. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, maybe, but and I think
I had a poem become a novella, if that counts.
Really? That's great. I love that. So, I think it's just really when you reread a Flash piece and realize, okay, is this working on its own merits as Flash, or does this really need to be something longer and, more weight given to certain themes, characters, developments, world building? I think that's kind of how you figure it out. I also want to say what works for Flash. I think, because it is so short, often like tipping your hat to tropes, tipping your hat to certain ideas that as a science fiction fantasy writer, we're all really familiar with, that you don't have to go into a lot of world building. I think that can help you, goes a long way with a Flash piece and keeping it short, but yet getting across the point, because as science fiction fantasy readers, we're familiar with a lot of tropes and different ideas. The Princess and the Dragon or whatever, that type of thing. You don't have to spend a lot of time exploring the backstory, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Again, a nice comprehensive answer. Vylar, how do you know that you've got Flash on your hands, or are you deliberately writing Flash on purpose? Do you ever, and I'm going to start you with a different question, which will link us into the next segment, which is, what is the point in which you start the story, and how far from the ending can you reasonably start in Flash?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer the question, simply because my superpower is I just know how long something is when I write it. Within 10%. Whether it's Flash, short story, or novel, I can predict the word count pretty well.
Wow.
I don't know. I can't tell you. What that implies to me is that I actually shape the story to the word count I'm looking for, to some degree. I mean, I obviously can tell the difference between Flash and novel. That's pretty easy. So it's very rare for me to start a story and discover it's not it's longer or shorter than I thought it would be. That just doesn't happen to me.
Okay.
So the way I know I have a Flash idea generally is it is a story with one turn in it. That's it.
Okay. That makes sense. I like to personally think of it as maybe having 2 to 3 story beats at most. And when I sit down and I do outline a lot more for Flash than I do for other stories, because I'm sort of this weird mix of pantser and plotter. But when I write Flash, I basically do write down, you have 100 words for the intro, Deborah. That's all you get. That's all you're allowed. And then that's where that idea goes. Then you have 200 words for rising action. That's where those ideas go. And then I find that helps a little bit.
You would have liked one prompt we did back in like 2009. There was a prompt about this.
Yeah,
it gave you a structure saying, right, that you get this much for the intro, then anyway.
Yeah. Some of my flash has just come organically as a pantsing sort of thing. Is just I started writing and it was a perfect flow, and I got exactly to the end at 1,000 words, and it was a beautiful thing. It doesn't always happen that way though. So if you're having trouble writing to that length, I really do recommend trying to change out how you write it, and actually try to do a structure on paper first, because it'll give you a better idea of how much room you have to do things. And I'm going to bop back to Amanda with where is the point where you start your story, and where's the point at which you end the story? Because how far from the ending can you reason? Because I like to start at the beginning of history or the beginning of your time. And I generally want to end up at the end of the universe and the heat death of it. And I want to go into detail at every point in between, because I am a novelist in my heart. With Flash, you have to kind of condense that a little bit. And since you're in the same boat as me, how do you know where to start and how do you know where to end?
Well, it's an answer where I would say it depends. Excuse me. In late out early is the old saw. I think I first heard on writing excuses, but it definitely applies all the more so to Flash. I think one time, me again being an epic fantasy writer, I attempted one piece where I was like, I'm going to try to do like the climax of this story. And so I got as close to the climax as I could. And I was like, look at this, it's its own little arc. And everybody was saying, this is the start of like a YA fantasy novel. This is not this nice self-contained little arc. And I was like, damn it. Sorry, I don't know if we can swear on this.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So it really depends. I mean, what happened was I started trying to think about smaller changes. So no, you really can't get into the big kind of world changing situations. And so I started trying to think about smaller moments, like in my shopping story. Okay, I was like, okay, I have space for a little setup to try to explain my concept, and then but that was another one that wound up being a little bit longer, so I crammed myself as close to the end as I could, but I was cramming in, all the character moments, all the characterization I could. So
That is a very nice full story, and when we get to that, I will
yeah.
really enjoy discussing it with you, because
Okay, yeah,
I want to see how. No, but by all means, I don't mind a little foreshadowing.
Okay. But yeah, that's like I said, it depends. I try to go with in late out early. In terms of when I decide to end a piece, it kind of depends on and this is going to the next question as well. For me, it depends upon the goal of the Flash piece. Am I going more for emotional resonance? Am I trying to let the reader draw their own conclusions? And, then maybe I want to withhold more and end it a little earlier. If I'm trying to make sure that there's a full arc for the character, I have to try to figure out, well, what's that one moment where the character has their epiphany, even if I don't explicitly state it. So it really, really depends upon my goals with the individual piece.
Okay, that is perfectly valid as an answer. Thank you. Aimee, how far from the ending can you reasonably start in Flash? How or should you begin in Flash? And how do you know when you've reached the end? Because sometimes I find myself still writing and going, no, this isn't the end yet. I'm still writing. This isn't the end yet. I'm 1,500 words in. I still haven't found an end. I need to back out completely and completely re-examine this piece.
Yeah, well, I tend to start my Flash stories really in the middle of the action, and partially this is because a lot of my Flash pieces are kind of what Amanda was talking about, like in experimental formats or non-traditional formats. I think it's kind of interesting because, Flash is so short, but I think it allows you a lot more room for experimentation. Like a story that uses unusual format works in Flash, but if you pushed it to 5,000 words, people might start to get a little irritated with like a list story that's 5,000 words. No one's going to want to read that. But I think, when you're using those non-traditional formats, like I had one Flash piece that was Am I the Asshole post. I had another that was a Craigslist listing. You're really just starting right in the middle of like what's happening, what problem this person's having. And then how do I know the ending? like often my flash pieces, I don't have like traditional endings or resolutions. It's more of like they end maybe with a multiple pathways, interpretations. They pose a question. You don't have to tie everything up. That's one.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do this in longer stories too, but I think it especially works in flash fiction that you have sort of like more open-ended endings, So I think partially it gets to the twist, which I know is one of your questions, so we can talk about that later. But I think for that, it speaks to the twist in the story.
Yeah, and I'm going to just move to Vylar with that, which is the twist.
Can I add something to this discussion first?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to bring up, I think you can do epic flash fiction. I wrote something called The Orange Tree Sacrifice, which is one we're not doing today, but you can do epic flash fiction. It's really hard. I actually set myself, how would I do that if I were going to do it? And you have to rely on some tropes and a lot of implication and some really, really big imagery, because it's that story has to fill a huge thing. And the story actually could be the last chapter of a novel.
Yes, absolutely.
But that it's not easy. I think it's the kind of thing that you do as a challenge once you've done short fiction. I would say that's not a thing you should try until you can really confidently do a small piece with the focus in closer. It's like learning photography. You learn how to take landscapes. You learn how to zero in on a flower or whatever. It's just different styles, but you want to start small with flash fiction.
I would like to recommend that people check out The Orange Tree Sacrifice. We decided not to do it because it also had large components of body horror and some other trigger warnings that I didn't want to handle right this moment, because it would be much more appropriate to a horror episode. But it's a really excellent story with incredibly vivid language. And if you guys want to check it out, I believe Vylar has it on her website. So by all means, go there and read it. It's good.
All of my fiction is reprinted on vylarkaftan.net, including my Nebula winning story, The Weight of the Sunrise.
Nice.
Yeah. The only thing not there is my novella, Her Silhouette Drawn in Water, which is available through Tor.com or wherever you purchase your fine books.
We have used the term fine venue and fine books repeatedly on this podcast. It sounds like we're selling wine. It was in at least 2 intros. So, and now we've used it a third time. So now I feel like we're pushing the aroma and bouquet of a fine wine. And
this has been aged a few years. You compare it with a nice bit of cheesy deliciousness and have a nice evening in.
Yes, I think that would be a wonderful way to spend your time.
Yeah. I don't know, what kind of cheese goes with a queer psychic thriller? I'm thinking some burp. Camembert? Okay.
Camembert would. All right. So we've been talking about endings, and there's a convention in flash fiction that a lot of people want to end on a twist. I personally think that subverting expectations works very well. I find sometimes that a twist ending sometimes feels almost too pat for me, but a good twist done well is undeniably effective. So have you ever done a twist ending, Amanda? Or do you not do that?
I think I tend not to do it, or at least as I define twists, because yes, I agree that they are hard to pull off in Flash. When I feel like they're done well, I feel like twists reconceptualize the story for me rather than kind of negating it. I've read some where what keeps occurring to me is Planet of the Apes, which, that twist ending would not work in Flash because it'd be like, well, what was the point? And for me, I like them when they are hinted at a little bit where, the story is still, a step or two ahead of me. And so I don't want to see it immediately, or else it's too obvious. And I'm like, well, thanks. But I mean, it's very tricky to do. And I, as a reader, can feel cheated, and like the whole piece I just read was a setup for a punchline. and then I wonder why I read it in the first place. So, but like I said, ones that reconceptualize a story and make me rethink it and go back and, oh, the clues were there all along, but now I have a new view on it. Those are what I enjoy the most.
We had a story last episode, which I'll just touch on briefly, which was My Summer of George by Sam Rebeline. It did very effectively set up clues throughout, basically the repetition of the flies that were in the story. And then the not a twist, but foreshadowed ending is that the narrator is dead, but he also views everybody else as just dead alive and waiting to be dead and filled with flies. So it was a horrific piece filled with dread and existentialism and everything like that. But you gradually got there by virtue of the fact that they were so carefully setting up everything every step along the way. So it wasn't a twist, but it did have a bit of a shock at the end, which was nice. Amanda, Aimee, do you tend to ever use the twist, or do you tend to go for subversion of the tropes that you were talking about, or what do you wind up doing to upset or not upset expectations at the ending of a Flash piece?
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about this question, I was thinking, yes, I do use twists, but now listening to you talking about twists, I'm wondering if we're thinking about these in different ways. Like,
we could be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not thinking necessarily of like a punchline ending, but just I think what works in Flash ending where it opens up the story in new ways. It makes you think about the story in different ways, and I guess I was thinking of that as the twist. But maybe the way you're thinking of twist is more extreme than how I'm thinking of it. Like I was thinking about this and thinking about like the very famous 6-word story, which is attributed to Hemingway. I'm not sure if he actually wrote it, but For Sale,
Who
Baby
knows?
Shoes, Never Worn, right? I mean, it has a twist ending. It opens it up, that very short story, in ways that you understand it, the first 4 words, very differently. So I guess that's what I was thinking in terms of twist. So I do use them because I think that's what makes Flash really effective, is like the ending. It can really pack a powerful punch in just illuminating the story in new ways. And I think that the ending, like to be an effective, like I would call it twist ending, it has to be inevitable, but surprising. And I think that's true for any good ending of a story. Like it needs to work. Like it needs to come to the ending where you are, as a reader, you understand it differently, understand what's happened in the story differently when you get to the end, but you're not like, what the hell? Like, what did they do here? Why? I feel like the wool's been pulled over my eyes. That's not going to work. And I think
an ending to me should feel inevitable. It should
inevitable and surprising. Yeah. And I guess that's what I was thinking was a twist. So yes, I according to my definition, I do like that. I do try to use it, but I don't like punchline endings. So
yes. Yeah. What I found when I was reading, when Escape Artists was doing their various 500-word Flash fiction contests, is that you would go through 117 stories or so, and most of them were trying to end on that twist. And after you've read about 45 of them in a row, it just is, yeah, I know, I've seen this. No. You're trying too hard to end on that twist, and you've read so many of them in a row that it loses the punch and the efficacy. So I would rather see subversion. I would rather see something that ends gently or gracefully, or even inevitably. Or if it's going to be a shock ending, I really want it to be a shock ending. And for it to again have that feeling of inevitability about it. But that's me. And Vylar, how about you? How do you feel about twists?
I'm in Camp Aimee. It's a great place. We know we need to define what a twist is with this discussion.
Yes.
Because there's a difference between when writers are always going around and going, stop doing twist endings, because most people think that they have to put a joke or a something to give it oomph at the end, and they structure it like a joke, which, a joke, a decent joke that takes a few paragraphs and leads to a really funny punchline. is a joke. It is not a flash fiction piece. It would be if it's done well, but it's usually just a joke. So if you can do a joke that is also a flash piece, great. For me, the key is the ending needs to be inevitable. It needs to be the ending that has to go in the story. It needs to be a story where the reader thinks that they know where it's going, and then it doesn't. And the reader says, but you know what? That ending it has is better than where I thought it was going, and I love it. You should be able to, at the end of a good flash fiction piece, because it's so short, you should get to the end and go, wow, really? That's what was happening? Oh! And then go back and read it with entirely new eyes. And it should be able to be read like in a brand new story almost. You'll see in actually almost all of my short fiction, the first sentence of the story, it has an entirely different meaning when you read it after you've read the story. It means something very different than what you thought it or has a different nuance to it. There's something much deeper going on with that first sentence than you thought there was. And
I like that.
Should circle you back around to the first sentence where you go, now if I read it this way, that wasn't a
circular structure is something we brought up in the last episode. Because circular structure is very satisfying to the reader, ending where you began, but then having gone just that little bit further. So it's a spiral.
The problem is really a lot of people do a twist that isn't earned. For example, you write your story about the mom and daughter fighting about school, and then in the end, the daughter goes to school and the mom takes off her human suit and she's an alien. Okay, but let the story set us up for that. Now, it's possible to be done right. For example, you could that doesn't work if it's just like, Mom, I hate school. Well, you got to go anyway. But if you do if the mom's saying some really weird stuff, like, but your flagella are not yet developed, and the daughter says, "What did you say, Mom? I can't hear you. I'm in the bathroom." And the mom corrects that to, "Did you do your algebra homework?" Then maybe you're going somewhere with that, because now the question is, does the daughter know about the mom being something weird? Does the mom hide you start getting someplace. Yeah. And then maybe you take it to some sort of thing where the mother, maybe the daughter finds a stray alien suit in the bedroom and that's where you're starting to tap into Selkie myth. And anybody who's familiar with Selkie myth might be familiar with it and start to go, there's like an alien suit caught here. And I think I'm just writing a flash fiction story on your podcast, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine. By all means, I look forward to seeing it published, because I know it will be. All right.
Ideas are easy. Development of ideas is much harder.
Yeah. So to sort of combine my next two questions, when you're over word count, you can be way over word count, or you can be a little over word count. What are some tips and tricks that you have to cut whole scenes when you're nowhere near word count? How do you, go, it's currently 2,000 words and Weekend Warrior is 750, and that's a really tight corset to try and fit something into, but something's got to go. Something's got to go. How do you cut whole scenes? How do you refocus the entire piece down to being, this is a question more for Amanda and me than maybe for the people who know what they're writing when they're writing it.
I can get a short answer, which is, this never happened to me. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. My answer to that is, don't do that. And if you do write a 2,000 word story and you only have 750 words, you should probably just try again. I
have often done that.
Oh yeah, if you're at 1,000 words, you can probably figure out how to cut it down. I usually say more than about 1,200, just don't. But then again, other people write differently, so you do you. But that's it.
I have actually gotten a 2,000 word story down to a Weekend Warrior length, and then I've re-expanded it again, reinflated it. But how about some tips and tricks on how to cut words when you're close to word count, but not quite there yet, which might be very useful to people who are doing Weekend Warrior right now as this contest goes on. Amanda, how do you cut just words and how do you cut scenes, if you do?
I'm kind of with Vylar, where if I have a 2K piece, I just try again with a new concept, because it actually makes me feel depressed to try to cut down the story. And then, I have a young kid, and it just feels like I'm wasting time because I already know that I'm going to grow the story again. So I usually just
Yes,
try
exactly.
over. But if I'm trying to go from 1,000 to 750, I mean, there's the standard cutting out your weasel words, your filtering language, like she thought, it seemed, passive voice, so on. But I would also say that maybe the rule of three doesn't always have to apply in Flash. We were talking about how, with the shorter piece, people are willing to hang with you a little longer. So I found, yes, I love callbacks, love them, love them. But I have found that sometimes if I already have my rule of three in there, maybe I can cut out the middle one. So I only have the one thing. I just try to make sure that my first image of that theme or motif really, really pops. And then I'm very careful about my callback to it. And so, but sometimes I don't need my middle one. So sometimes I'm like,
That's a
yes,
good idea.
I get to cut whole sentences by removing this little piece here.
Aimee, how do you cut?
Well, I'm just going to make a comment too about Weekend Warrior that 750 words is really hard. And every year I do it, Vylar, I'm like, geez, this is like so sadistic for writers to try to.
But it's a good exercise. It is a very good exercise.
That surprises you that I would set up a sadistic goal like that.
I have to say, in the back of my mind, I'm always like, all right, 750 words, but I can't expand it to 1,000 words and it'll still be Flash. So I sort of work that little margin of expansion when I'm writing. But anyway, to get it down, I would say I agree with totally what Vylar and Amanda said. So I don't want to repeat what they said, but I just want to point out that I think, an effective Flash piece also does need it needs good texture. It can't be bare bones. So I think when you're cutting so much to the point where you only have the bones left, like maybe you need to rethink what kind of length of story this is. But that being said, like maybe you need one really or two poetic phrases in the story. It doesn't have to be like every paragraph. So I would just say like, you really just have to think about what's essential, what works, what will leave you with a good Flash piece with some texture and beauty about it, but get that length down to what you're looking for. But I agree too. If it's like 2,000 words, 1,500 words, you might not be able to cut it down to 750 words.
Put that one to the side. Come back to it when you have time. Let it expand out to its natural length of 6K, and go from there.
Well, I didn't set it to 500, which is what I originally was going to do.
Oh my god!
I have written those for Escape Pod. It is really, really hard. It is really hard.
The reason I changed to 750 for Weekend Warrior, like I said, I was thinking that, and I eventually went to 750 because I thought 500 is terrific for literary Flash fiction. It really is. But science fiction often requires just a little bit more setup, not a lot. You can use tropes, but you need just a little bit to kind of get your concept in there. And then over time, I think a lot of people took their 750s and made them 1,000. And so 1,000 has become something of a standard for science fiction now over time. And I actually think Codex influenced that. I think Weekend Warrior and Codex was an influence on that development. But the definition of Flash fiction has always been a little bit fluid. I've seen it go up to 1,500. I refuse to accept any definition beyond that. I don't even think 1,500 is Flash fiction at all. And the reason I come down to, I could accept 1,000. That's fine with me. 750 or 1,000 is fine. The reason I can accept about 1,000 is it just there's a difference in the type of story. Once you get to 1,500, there's actual scenes and maybe a little bit of development. It's a little bit different of a thing. It is possible that there are stories of different lengths just because of the way they're written, that you could have a Flash fiction that's 1,400 and a full short story that's 1,200. It's not likely, but you could do it. So
I will definitely say something that I said on the last episode, which is once you've finished your writing and you're looking at ways to revise, it's a good time to look at how you've organized your information, because sometimes I have found that I can just, I've repeated that idea. And it doesn't need to be repeated. The second time I said it better. Let's just grab that sentence and put it into the first slot and get rid of that entire sentence there. And then I have removed an entire sentence. I've reduced my word count, and I've chosen the better way of expressing it. So don't do it while you're writing necessarily, but when you're doing the revision portion of the agenda, look at your organization, look at how you've structured your ideas, see if there's repetition, things like that. And with that, we're going to change topics, and we're going to talk about each person's individual works. And we're going to start with Amanda with the story Shopping at the Soul Patch Consignment Store, which appeared in Worlds of Possibility, August 2023. This is a Julia Rios production, and it's a lovely story. In this surrealist piece, a mother is shopping for pieces of soul that might help fill in the blanks in her son's spirit, filling in the places where he'd given up hobbies and interests before, trying to ensure that he's filled out before he goes to college. But he doesn't want to be filled out with other people's aims and lost yearnings. He wants to be accepted for himself, empty spaces and all, which he comes to realize in the end. This is a lovely and poignant piece. Where did the idea come from, Amanda?
Well, this is another Codex Weekend Warrior story. I believe this was from the 2023, and my prompt here was, where is the weirdest place for a hole? And I went pretty immediately to Hole in the Soul, which, I mean, it's an awful rhyme, but that's what came to me. I forget exactly how I came to the consignment store, but being a parent, and my daughter was only 3 when I first wrote this, but I'm already seeing how she's becoming her own little person and already aware of, I want to encourage her to, like some of the things I like, but also trying to accept that she is her own person. And, I don't want to force her into my own vision. And so, of course, I was thinking this is all the more significant when the child is a teenager, starting to think about going off to college and all of that, and thinking back to when I was a teenager and similar feelings. And so and again, when I was trying to go for a small amount of change, I was like, okay, a mother can rethink how she's interacting with her child. And when she sees actual fear, I need to pull back. And so this was an arc I thought I could manage in a flash piece. And, it just went from weirdest place for a hole in the soul, and then parenting feels. And that's it.
Well, I think it's a very dynamic piece, and I loved it. So I think you accomplished exactly what you were setting out to do. And the fact that there is change in the way she views her son and the way she views herself interacting with him, it gives it enormous texture and a lot of beauty. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. I was very pleased that Julia picked this up for their project. This was one of my favorite stories to come out of that year, Weekend Warrior.
All right. Does anybody else want to say anything about this story before we move on to Vylar?
I just think the idea of a hole in the soul is very resonant, because a lot of us know what that feels like, especially after the last couple of years. I think everyone's taken some psychic damage these last few years, and it's very resonant, the idea of trying to fulfill or repair or do anything to try to close the hole or repair it or anything. And so I think that's why it works for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Vylar, she has a story called Scar Stories, which appeared in the Bandersnatch anthology in 2007. It's available on her website, so I totally encourage you to go read it. In this unconventionally told tale, which borders on the surreal, a stranger at a party asks people about their scars, leading to a chain of individual stories, each a little snippet out of time. And this chain of stories begins with the mundane and steadily becomes stranger and stranger. I loved the climactic moment when the punch bowl proudly states that it has no scars, and the partygoers break it and use the shards to carve new scars upon one another. What does that climactic moment mean to you, and what do you want people to take away from this story?
Punch bowls are jerks. No, that's not actually my point. The scar stories, my intent is for people to understand that everybody's got something, and sometimes the stories are more interesting than others. It's true. I have some interesting ones and some kind of boring ones. And they all have some sort of, it's like something is written upon your body and it's going to be there forever. And that scar is usually in a way non-consensual, in the sense that you did not ask for it, but you're stuck with it. And life is like that. There's a lot of things that happen to us that damage us that we can't do anything about. But at least that aspect is part of being human. It unifies all of us it's part of being alive. It's part of being real. To have damage done to you, it's part of who you are at this point in your life. And those damages, you certainly can take steps to heal them, but even if there's a mark left for all time, you still have your potential to be to be yourself, to be human, to be shaped by it in healthy ways.
I like that. Where did you get the notion for this story? Because this would have been during Weekend Warrior's reign, where you were 15 years running it, but I don't think that you wrote it for it, did you?
No, I never entered Weekend Warrior. I just ran it. It didn't seem fair to me to generate the prompts and enter that. I sometimes wrote alongside, like I didn't enter, but I wrote some things. This one was just written separately. I don't remember. It's been a long time. I don't remember exactly why I started this. I think I just started the story and wrote it at the length it would be, and it turned out quite short. I realized it wasn't very long, but I was like, okay, well, and I just edited it to the length I wanted. My favorite rejection I got, but most stories get rejected multiple times before they're purchased.
Oh, yes.
My favorite rejection on this one was a well-known editor wrote back to me a simple note that said, "I don't understand anything that happened after the cat started talking." I thought to myself, I'm like, that is a clear sign that you're the wrong person for the story. Okay. That's the turn. That's the first point where something that's not a person is starting to talk. And all of a sudden, if the cat starts talking, it's suddenly a magical realism moment. If the cat's talking, you're suddenly like, okay, something's different here. This is not the story I thought I was in.
Yeah, but it works. And
other people, if they're more literal and they're reading it if they're reading it very literally, that's very confusing when the cat starts talking. Like, why is this cat talk? So.
Well, the cat talking didn't get me. The party itself talking was when I was going. They're going, this is a little more surreal than I was expecting, but I can roll with it.
But you notice the cat comes before the cat has to come before the party because it's
a blinker signal.
Yeah. Gradually,
I'm making a left turn. And it's very carefully and very deliberately done so that everything escalates over time, because it wouldn't make much sense for them to all fall on each other and start carving scars on each other in this wild abandon as the orgy of violence if the cat hadn't spoken first.
Yeah.
So
which is a sound I've never heard before in my life, so I appreciate that.
Aimee, 9 lies you tell yourself about ghost hunting, which I think I had the privilege of reading during Weekend Warrior, the year that you wrote it. In this story, the narrator is the female sidekick of the gentleman ghost hunter, whose past is littered with deceased former sidekicks, at least one of whom, as a ghost, is trying to reach out to the narrator to save her from a similar grisly fate. I loved how this story moves from denial to acceptance to survival with the narrator, and how it ends with the gentleman ghost hunter earning his well-deserved comeuppance. Because this is not a twist, but it's a dynamic story. And I love the fact that it's about survival as opposed to, it could very easily have been she joined all the other ghosts in the house, but it didn't. And I'm very grateful for that. So how did you come up with this idea? And what is your favorite thing about this story?
This was a Weekend Warrior story as well. And, the prompt was, it was a sentence. It was, true love is like ghosts, which everyone talks about and few have seen. And this is really my
I wrote one for that one too.
Oh, that's such a good quote. But it's like my supernatural reaction story. Like, I watched almost every season of that show, and I just hate the way women in that show are just dispatched. Like, the sidekicks are just, and they die for stupid reasons, because the main story in that show was about the two brothers. But I was thinking about it and thinking about love, and I was thinking about toxic relationships, as I think that quote kind of hints about sort of, that a lot of relationships aren't happy, and that how, a lot of relationships men in heterosexual relationships, use women as stopgaps or to kind of take the psychic damage from the relatives, from everything that's going on in the world. It's the woman in the relationship who have to deal with the trauma and the suffering, and the man gets off, scot-free. So it's kind of about that specific type of toxic relationship and heterosexual dynamics in relationships. So that's kind of where it came from. And the one thing I really love about it is, I would consider this a twist. It's like the use of the second voice, second person, because usually in second person, it's the narrator talking to themselves. And this, you realize at the end of the story that it's actually a ghost of one of the sidekicks. She's haunting the current sidekick, but for good. She's trying to save her from going down the same path that she went down. And it does have a happy ending. And I wanted to show that there can be happy endings, that sometimes it's not the relationship itself, it's getting out of that relationship and getting out of a toxic situation. It's the happy ending. And so anyway, that was the twist for me. And that's what I really liked. And when Wendy bought this for Nightmare, she said when she got to the ending, it made her dance, because I think she also liked that sort of reframing of, like we were talking about earlier, reframes how you understand the story and who was actually talking and where this was coming from. Yeah, but it's also an example of, it's a list story, and I think it's a story that probably only works in a flash format. I think if this was longer, it probably wouldn't work as well. And it's slightly longer.
It works perfectly in the space that it has. It works perfectly in the space that it has. So yeah.
And it's 1,200 words. Actually, I expanded it from 750 to 1,200. So that's one of those.
But it works.
But got a little bit bigger.
I loved it as it was when I read it, because I remember giving this one a very high score. But I don't know. I cannot tell you what you added. It just feels very full and exactly right for the length that it is. So yay!
Well, thank you.
Golf clap. Back to Amanda. The Sunnyside Daycare Employees Chat Log Post-Alien Takeover, which appeared in Small Wonders magazine in 2022.
And
this is a story.
It was originally published in Unidentified Funny Objects 9 in 2022.
It was? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so
it's
sorry.
At the very end of the story but the free-to-read version is Small Wonders.
Okay, well, by all means, let's give a credit where it's due to Unidentified Funny Objects, which is an anthology that I have longed to get into, but I don't write funny enough, unfortunately. I tend to hit this bittersweet elegiac note, and then I can't deviate from it. So, this is a story in an unusual format, that of literally a chat log between a former human employee of a nursery school and the alien who took her job. It's a delight seeing the aliens slowly coming to terms with and learning respect for the human they displaced, and finally asking for her help and getting her a better living wage for doing the hard work of raising tiny humans. How did you come up with this idea, and why did you decide to structure it in this dialogue-centric manner?
One of my secrets for Weekend Warrior is that I will also come up with a list of things I think I might want to write about, because that gives me something to work with the prompts. And so I think my notes I reread my brainstorming notes here, and I literally wanted to do I have in quotes, something funny with toddlers and aliens from the get-go. And so from there, I apparently used the word list, but I only wrote down, I don't know where my mind was this week, but the only word I wrote that I picked from the word list was syllabus. And that gave me an idea for a daycare, because, with the young kids, if it's a Montessori thing or something, they do have some little syllabus where they're doing certain things for the kids. And so that brought me to the daycare setting. And then my frustration with the United States lack of support for parents was really coming through with this piece, because I hear all the horror stories about, large daycare chains that are run in a much too corporate manner, and not focusing on the workers, not focusing on the kids. And then that brought me to alien takeover of a daycare, and the aliens don't know shit about children. Kind of like these large corporations don't know shit about children. And but I wanted it to be funny, and because, sometimes you have to laugh not to cry. And so satire and, trying to have a little bit of hope at the ending. So And, I just, well, I like to do a lot of variety with all of my writing. So I like to try humor
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. I like to do more poignant. And so this was
Mm-hmm.
when I wanted something funny because I think I was just tired of not having something to laugh at. So, in terms of why I decided to structure this in a non-traditional dialogue-centric manner, again, word count. That was another
Yes.
literal comment in my brainstorming. I was like, I think this is going to go over 750. So, what can I do to try to keep it shorter? But what I
Yeah.
also like about these non-traditional formats is that it lets you more easily play with what you don't include. And
Yes.
so, and that I think sometimes can become just as much of the story as what is actually there. And like Aimee was saying, you usually get more buy-in with the reader for these non-standard formats. I would not want to read, 3,000 words of a chat dialogue back and forth. It
No.
might be fun as a radio play or something, but so it's just kind of fun to play with. Can I get all the information to the reader quickly enough that they can understand this concept using this format and still keep it interesting? And so for me, it's just kind of fun to play with. And I also,
I envy you guys for being able to do the non-traditional formats, because I keep trying and most of the time it just completely fails for me. The only time I've gotten one that worked for me was basically doing the dictionary format a couple of years ago, and that one sold. But yeah, the non-traditional formats is harder than it looks.
it is. And I'm actually a first reader over at Diabolical Plots, and David tends to love these kind of non-standard formats. So it's fun being a first reader there because I feel like a lot of people send that stuff over to us and
Mm-hmm.
can get a first peek of what I feel works and doesn't work. And so
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a fun thing for me to play with, really.
All right, we're going to move back to Vylar with her story, What President Polk Said, which appeared in Phantom but is available again on her website. Again, a fabulous story, which is set in the California gold rush, where the narrator fears that crazy man Dawson, who haunts the gold camp that not literally haunts, I would like to point out he's not a ghost yet. He haunts the gold camp that they live in using a Bowie knife he calls President Polk to intimidate and terrify others into listening to his conspiracy theories. Someone makes an accusation that Dawson stole gold. A group of men, including the narrator, decide to get Dawson drunk and jump him. Getting him drunk was the narrator's job, and he's very surprised when Dawson hands him the Bowie knife, claiming that President Polk wants a word with him. Then the group waylays him, ties him to a tree, and leaves him to die slowly of exposure in the wilderness. Not long afterwards, the narrator strikes it rich and leaves the camp, taking the Bowie knife with him. He could have gone back to the tree and freed the guy. It probably would have allowed him to survive, but he chooses not to do so. And for years afterwards, he takes the knife out and listens to hear if it finally speaks to him, so that he'll at least have the excuse of madness to explain away what he did to Dawson. The story is an absolute tour de force of the darker side of human nature, the less explicable impulses, and the uncomfortable truths. What do you want the audience to take away from this one, and where did you get the idea?
Well, I got the idea because this is what they really did during the gold rush. This is how they treated mental illness, because there were no mental hospitals or anything like that. And I was writing another piece set in the gold rush, and I read this bit in my research and went, wow. And this did not fit in my other piece anywhere. I tried. I was like, nope, this doesn't go here. Well, I guess I'm writing another story about it. So I did. And
Okay.
So I wrote this basically as an incident that doesn't appear in my other novella. It's just, some people out in the gold rush. I didn't use the same characters or anything. But it's the sad truth of what went on in that time when there wasn't really anything. And the narrator spends a lot of time convincing his audience as desperately as he can that this was what they had to do. There was no other way.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, is it? Is that what you have to do? I mean, I'm not gonna weigh in. I don't know what you can say about that, because that is what they did. It's inhuman, but there weren't really good alternatives. I mean, I think that the key point here is he really could have probably managed to get Dawson back and take him to civilization. I think he could have done so in the situation and chose not to, because he could not bear the thought of going back to see what had happened and what was going on there. And if he went back and saw it, he would know he was a murderer, which is, a horrible sin. And if he leaves it ambiguous in his mind, at least he can kind of maybe pretend to himself that he didn't do that. So I think that's where it goes with that, and the fact that it's not a speculative story, at least, but there's the implication that the knife might be about to speak, because you usually read, if you're reading it in a science fiction context, you're thinking that knife's going to say something, and when it doesn't, that's when the horror strikes, because you just don't. You thought the knife was going to say something to change this? No, probably just a knife.
It's probably just a knife, and he's probably got to live with this.
Yeah.
And it is, the horror hits really hard. And I think that it ends exactly where it needs to end. And it's an amazingly full piece for such a short piece. It does not feel like a short piece at all. It feels incredibly filled. So,
one time I got to read it at a performance site where I had someone who was doing improv electronica music behind me as I read. That was amazing.
Ooh.
Yeah. He was doing it for everybody who was reading that night. He had read the pieces in advance. So he had some idea where he was going. But he gave gave just some chords, nothing to take over, but just, and there was this kind of, as I was reading that tension part where they're starting to tighten, there's this tiny note going thump, thump, kind of like a heartbeat during that part. And it was it had sort of a Telltale Heart vibe to it.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was really fun. It was a good experience.
Aimee, Advanced Problems in Word Math, which appeared in Daily Science Fiction on January 3rd, 2020. This is an acutely, and I use the mathematical term advisedly, feminist story full of anger at the missed opportunities and lack of fairness in a woman's life from age 13 to age 30. The protagonist looks for portals whenever life seems least fair, and finally finds one when she's 30. Calculate the probability that she'll take her daughters with her, leaving her husband alone with his 80-hour work weeks. How did you come up with the idea for this story, and how did you decide to structure the story around word problems?
Yeah, so this is another Weekend Warrior story. It was from the prompt, how do we decide what matters? And I kind of wanted to look at, how, traditional fantasy, it's very heroic. What we consider heroic people are, people who fight, who, battle dragons, whatever, but that, the issues that a lot of people have to deal with on a daily basis, like unsupportive parents, predatory older men, an unequal marriage, require a lot of emotional strength and resilience to cope with that.
Yes.
And so I really wanted to frame it about who's really the hero here, and why isn't Penny being recognized as a hero? And as far as the format, I think I took two things that are really, one thing I really love, which is portal fantasies. I love portal fantasies, and something I really that have problems with portal fantasies for those reasons. And thinking of C.S. Lewis and how he treated Susan.
Oh yes,
that she wasn't allowed back to Narnia because she started wearing lipstick and nylons. So something I love, but I have problems with.
She had the audacity to grow up. I mean, God forbid.
Yeah, and become exhibit traits that are considered traditionally female, which isn't heroic, I guess, or heroic enough to, be let back into Narnia. Anyway, and then I took something that I really don't like, which are word problems. I'm not a math person, and something I always disliked about word problems is they always hint at a story. Vylar and Amanda get on separate trains, but Vylar is going 30 miles an hour faster than Amanda. Who gets there first? I'm like, well, wait. Why are they on separate trains? How does Amanda feel about being on a slower train than Vylar? What of this? And so I like that format, and I just kind of love fitting together this ridiculous idea of a word problem that you can mathematically kind of figure out why certain people are allowed to be or considered heroes and others aren't. And it's really who decides. How do we decide what matters? Well, we're deciding what matters, and it's a very unequal world. So there's no rationality to it, perhaps, but we like to pretend that there is.
But she tries to bring rationality to it every time she tries to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Which is another little cut of the knife in the story, which is just lovely.
Yeah.
We're going to change subjects here a little bit. We're going to go from our mutual admiration society to other people's work, because on Shining Moon, we like to elevate people who we don't know necessarily. And I believe Samantha Murray is on Codex, but I don't think I know her. Her story that we're going to be looking at appeared in Lightspeed in March of 2023. It is called 4 Years Minus 12 Days. It is a poignant story about living with loss before it even occurs. The protagonist, you, in the second-person tale, is married to an alien of the Svar species, whose life cycle is such that they only get 4 years precisely to be the person that they are right now, and that after those 4 years are up, they will move to the next stage of their life cycle, unable to feel the same way as their previous selves did. This is a fabulous metaphor for grief and loss without having the full punch of a story about death. It doesn't have to have any trigger warnings. Because it doesn't have death in it. It's a little bit removed from that, but it's still about loss and grief. I found it deliciously written, so thank you to whoever it was of the three of you who recommended this one. What did you like about the story? What does it do effectively in such a short space? And since second person is a contentious topic, how does it do it well? And how do you do second person well as a whole? And I'm going to start with Amanda. What did you like? What did it do effectively? And what did you think about it second person?
Well, I definitely agree about this being such an effective metaphor for grief, separation, whether, thinking about reality, whether it's through death or a person becoming someone you feel you don't know anymore, or worse, they feel like they don't recognize you anymore, and that's why they go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, this is packing a huge amount of world building in such a short space. And according to Lightspeed, anyway, it is under 750 words, which is just shocking to me. I don't know that I could manage that. And so, with a few death sentences, it establishes the Svars and their life cycle. So it's just enough detail to understand the premise. And even though that was presented as outright exposition, it literally gives you what the Safar's life cycle is, it's so short and the prose was so accomplished that I didn't mind. And so, wonderful world building packed in a short space. I envy that because I'll have to read that story of yours, Vylar's, that is epic fantasy in a short space, because I have not been able to accomplish that myself yet. So I will have to learn from the masters.
We'll have to find some then.
No, but and here, let's see, this is going into second person. I feel it works well because there's no resolution for the protagonist, and that kind of is how it works in real life when we first lose someone. There's no resolution for us, and so because that is so familiar to me, it worked really well being second person, because I was like, if I'm in that situation, no, there's no resolution for me, and I'm left with the grief that I have to figure out how to handle. So I felt that worked really well. I was kind of thinking I'd have to ponder this more, but I think if this were first or third person, it might actually need to be longer, because at that point you have more of a specific character, and I don't know, I'd have to think about that more. But I was like, I think the second person works really well in this piece.
That's a really good point. Thank you. I hadn't even thought of that. Aimee, what did you like about the story? What does it do effectively? And what did you think about the second person use?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, I like second person. I know a lot of people don't like it, or they say never write second person, but I feel like, I don't know. I feel like that's just sort of something people say, and they don't really think that much about second person. They just write it off. But I think it can actually make a story more feel closer. And people feel like it can be distancing, but I actually kind of disagree with that. I think in some cases it can make you feel a lot closer to the character. I just love the emotional pack of this story. I felt like it tells such a universal story in such a small space, and that's what Flash can be really good at. And it's something that everybody faces in every relationship. I mean, I know this is probably morbid, but every relationship will end at some point.
Yes.
And I think despite that, we keep going, right? I mean, we keep wanting to have relationships and wanting to love people, because that's what makes you human. And I think that the story, for me, as the emotional heart of the story, is what I really love. I think I just will agree with everything Amanda said. I don't want to repeat what she said. I agree. Like the world building's great. It just sets things up with a little hint here and there. You can understand what's going on in the world. You don't need the huge exposition. So I think this is.
We don't need to start at the beginning of the universe and the evolution of the Svar and why they're like this. None of that's necessary.
Right. Exactly.
Vylar, what did you think about this story?
I basically am right with Amanda and Aimee. I think that it is a terrific story about essentially unrequited love, the unrequited love that grief is. Because you're loving into a void and you know it's still there, what you love, but it doesn't recognize you, or it isn't present in any way.
Isn't capable of responding, yes.
Responding or anything like that. And I think the story works because it leaves it at the end. There is nothing that can be done. There is no resolution. It's just nothing. You know, and we don't even need to know why exactly this person started things. You could sit here and argue a lot of stuff about, well, why'd you start dating this thing? Or, you know, you don't need to know. It doesn't matter. It just happened somehow, and now it's happening. And there's a lot of world implied around the story, which is what you're really trying to do in flash fiction. Is it's as if you're showing one pixel, one little square pixelated area of a larger piece of art, and you think people could probably draw the entire picture based on the little spot they're seeing because you've chosen just the right spot. And not every picture, it's not possible to do that with every picture. If the picture is just, you know, a forest, you're going to show some trees. You can't just imply the whole place is trees. But if you can get it so that you're showing like where two roads intersect, and you see the corner of a wheelbarrow in place, and you see the corner of a car coming the other way. You see the story. You could draw the rest of that picture if you had the space to do so. And that's what you're trying to do in flash fiction, is give them just that little section of it, just the focal point, just enough that if someone wanted to, they could write the whole thing out, and it wouldn't be nearly as interesting.
And I know that you've got a call coming at the half hour, Vylar.
10
so
minutes,
did you want to go ahead? Let's go ahead and give you the opportunity to say your goodbyes.
Okay.
And therefore, I'm gonna ask you to jump ahead a little bit and say, do you have something coming out soon or out recently that you'd like to focus people's eyeballs on?
I actually don't at this point. I had a hard time in the pandemic, but I am working on coming back out of that, the deep darkness that many of us went into. So, and if anyone else is in the same boat, look, we all did what we had to do to get through it, and it's just you know, every generation, every part of humanity has had something happen in their lifetime, as it were. You know, some people got world wars, some people got pandemics, you know, and maybe we'll get all of them. You know, there's still time to have a war, you know. Anyway, but seriously, you know, we were bound to have something awful happen, you know, or multiple awful things happen, depending on where you live. So, you know, you get through it the best you can. You use it to power the rest of your life, and, you know, use it to improve yourself. And that's where I'm going to do my very best to come out of kind of the funk I was left in. I was kind of left with a lot of cynicism about humanity that I'm working on. So I might be going back to some really dark stuff for a while here as I work through a lot of rage. So.
Yeah, understood. Well, thank you very much for having been on to speak with us. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I will let you go so that you can get ready for your next conversation that you have to go to. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, we have one more story to cover, and that's why I wanted to let her go, because this is going to take us a little while to talk about, and I didn't want to run into her time. So we have this story, which is called The Third Martian Dick Temple by Sheila Marie Borideux. Daily Science Fiction, May 23rd, 2018. In this story, the narrator has discovered an ancient temple on Mars uncovered by the movement of water and wind during terraforming on the Red Planet. While she begins the story eager to discover something new, she's initially deeply disappointed to discover that this temple, just like the two discovered before it, is simply filled with mummified phalluses. From the surreal, almost absurdist premise, we move to a moving conclusion that the Martians must have been very like us after all, and their inability to focus on a message for the ages that said something more important than a bunch of mummified dicks. What did we like about this story? What does it do effectively in a short space? Amanda, what did you think about this story?
Well, yeah, the deftness with which it moves from absurdity to meaning, however kind of despairing, really well done. And I really appreciated the through line of the protagonist's frustration over having to research more mummified Martian penises, because that kind of gives us something to glom onto, to go from the absurdity to the pathos, because and we were talking about tropes, so definitely this starts with the trope of on exploring Mars, of all places. How many times has Mars been explored in science fiction? And so it's a quick setup, because we know what it's like, or we've read stories about people exploring Mars, except then there's this Martian temple, and it's of dicks, more dicks. And not only is it that, but this is the third time this astronaut has been,
subjected to this.
subjected to this. And now base is gonna send her back, and she has to collect samples, because what if these ones are different? We have to know. We on Earth have to know what's different about these particular mummified Martian penises. And so, just the going through to the talk show, we all, know what a talk show is, and how inane some of those interviews can be. And especially when I'm thinking now of red carpet interviews with the women. And so, I mean, and so,
how did it feel to handle them?
Yeah.
What sort of sizes were there? Were you impressed by the sizes? Things like that. I would be the questions you expect to hear.
Yeah, and so it's that I thought was very well done. And this is the type of twist I like, where I didn't consider it a gotcha, but it reconceptualizes what went on before.
Yes.
So we go from saying, oh, haha, those funny Martians, they were building temples to their dicks. What's with that? And then to step back and say, wait a minute, how is that actually different from us after all? And so,
when you consider if you have any sort of grounding in archaeology at all, the number of statues of penises and everything, and the winged penises that the Romans had, and the everything like that, it is very similar to us. Whether it's there's the graffiti that you see on the side of the road, or what was carefully and lovingly crafted by by ancient artisans, there is a certain similarity.
Yeah. So I thought, I thought it was very, very well done. So it was new to me. It was not one I had suggested, but yeah, it's I really admired the arc and the ability to go through that. And another case where it's the perfect ending for the story, I think.
Aimee, what did you think?
I remember reading this when it came into my inbox, and I enjoyed it then. And I just want to say, as an aside, I really do miss daily science fiction. It was a loss for the flash fiction community that went on a hiatus. Hopefully, it is just a hiatus. I don't know if it's going to come back or not. But as an aside, I thought this was a great short flash piece. I mean, it's funny, it's humorous, but like, again, like you were saying, Deborah, like it reminded me of you look at like old Roman ruins, and like they're always like phalluses being drawn on them, and like the graffiti is there. But I just, I think also, given that, we're dealing with things now, like the pandemic, but also, climate change, and the sense that we might not be here forever, the human race. Like, I think you read this, a story like this, and you think about humanity, and like the line that that they knew the end was coming, and they met it with raging heart on after raging heart on. The line just makes me laugh, but I just think I kind of feel like humanity is sort of the same, maybe for better or worse. Like maybe we could use our energy in more constructive ways. I don't know. Maybe if the Martians had not been so focused on dick temples, they could have done something else with their society. I don't know. But I think that the story packs a lot to think about in a short space, and it's funny. It's funny, and I think the ending is is good. It's not a punchline, but I think it's like Amanda said, it does make you think about what came before it in a different way. So it's a very good Flash story.
All right. Going forward, do either of you have something coming out soon or out recently that you'd like people to read? I'm going to start with Aimee this time. What do you have coming out soon or out recently?
I don't have anything coming out soon. Like Vylar, I actually didn't write that much in the last year. Maybe it's a pandemic after effect and my job's gotten kind of crazy. I'm not sure. But I did just have a story that came out in the December issue of the Deadlands. It's not flash fiction, but it's a ghost story, and I hope that people might read it. It's called Image Not Found, Francesca's Bridge. I believe Amanda's read this story. Amanda and I are actually in the same critique group. So this is a haunted ghost story told through a social media, Scooby Gang, kind of a group of people on social media and a haunted little social media group who are trying to track down the history and the truth behind a haunted covered bridge. So anyway, that just came out. Nifty. It just went live January 4th. So check it out.
The Deadlands is really hard to get into, so congratulations. I have been trying to get something in with Elise since she was at Shimmer, and I have never managed it yet. So wow.
First one, and I never got into Shimmer. Anyway, I was thrilled. I was thrilled that they picked it up. So yeah.
All right. And how about you, Amanda? Anything out recently or coming out soon that you'd like to direct people's eyeballs towards?
I still don't have a date for it, but I will have one more Weekend Warrior 2023 piece coming out in Uncanny at some point.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was very pleased that they picked it up.
Speaking of places that is hard to get into.
Yeah, it may never happen again. We'll see. But the story is called The God Descendant, but I again don't have a date for it. So, I mean,
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye out for that. All right. Thank you both for having been here to speak with me this week. I've really enjoyed our conversation. We've gone a little long, but it has been a jam-packed episode, and we covered a lot of ground, and you had wonderful, insightful things to say. So thank you both. Next week on Shining Moon, we'll be deviating a little bit to Shared Visions, Writing with a Co-Writer, which will feature Marie Brennan, Alice Helms, Kathy Bailey, and Kurt Pankow. As always, if you like my content, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you all next week, and we are out.